Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to SharedServicesLink.com radio. I'm Matthew Garrett-Fisher, Head of Research at SharedServicesLink.com. This is SSL Radio, our series of interviews with leaders in finance, shared services and outsourcing. Now, today we're focusing on the importance of building a compelling business case to get your e-invoicing program off the ground. And I have invited Pete Loughlin, who is Head of Purchase to Pay at Orange Business Services, to talk to us about his experience and views on this. Hello, Pete.
Hi, Matthew.
Now, I'm delighted to have Pete with us. And to give you listeners some background, Pete has worked in the Purchase to Pay space for about 15 years. And as a consultant, he's worked with some of the largest organizations in the world in a wide range of projects, including e-procurement, supply chain, finance, and e-invoicing. Pete's blog, Purchasing Insight, is read by thousands of readers each week and has become known as an authoritative online resource for P2P. Now, Pete, welcome to the show. You're here to discuss building the business case for e-invoicing. So why is e-invoicing so hard for companies to get off the ground?
I think, Matthew, historically, it has been very difficult for many organisations to get a really effective buy-in for electronic invoicing. It's either been seen as something that is too hard to do, or it's been seen as a low priority project relative to other important projects. But we also have to remember that to manage a successful e-invoicing program and to get effective buy-in, it needs buy-in not only from finance, but also from purchasing or procurement, and that isn't always easy.
Okay. So why is the business case often not convincing enough then to start an e-invoicing program? Yeah,
I think on the face of it, the case for e-invoicing should be compelling, and intuitively, it makes a huge amount of sense. The traditional invoicing is inefficient. It's manual. It's paper-based, and in 2011, when IT is supporting most business processes, I think paper invoicing doesn't really fit. It's an anachronism in 2011. But that kind of intuitive or emotional business case isn't really convincing enough. It certainly feels right, and people can certainly understand the sense of that kind of business case that plays to that obvious intuitive feel. But it needs to translate into cash. It's not really good enough to when building a business case, to talk about efficiencies that make things just easier to do. They have to be able to transform an organisation so that you're using fewer resources, whether that's fewer people or lower outsourcing costs. It needs to, that the savings need to be expressed in terms of tangible cash savings. But, it's not always that easy. Translating that kind of obvious, compelling, intuitive business case that paper is very last century and so on, isn't always that easy. It can be quite complicated. And the problem is that the CFO or the decision maker is always going to say, show me the money. It's not really good enough to be clever with IT or use IT for IT's sake. We really do need to find ways of estimating as accurately as possible what the bottom line impact is going to be for moving from paper to electronic invoicing.
Okay, Pete. From your experience, what 2 tips would you advise companies to take to help them construct their own e-invoicing business case then?
Okay. Yeah, there are two tips that I would strongly recommend for building a compelling business case. And this applies to many business cases. It's not unique. First of all, is only to build the business case in terms of money, and importantly, to make sure it really is real money. Savings based on or expressed in terms of time, for example, which is often used, are no use. The reality is that 5 minutes saved here or 5 minutes saved there doesn't necessarily crystallize into a cash saving. It can simply mean that somebody will no longer have to work through the lunch break to get things done. It may be that that there are genuine savings in terms of time, but they only count when it gets to a whole number of people who can be redeployed. Or there could be a saving in terms of speed of payments, for example. It's not really good enough to say we'll be able to pay our suppliers quicker or we'll get paid quicker. We need to express the benefit of that speed in terms of cash, like interest saved on an overdraft or interest earned. Cash is the currency of the business case, and it's really important that it's the only currency. I think the second tip I would recommend is not to reinvent the wheel. If you're building a business case for electronic invoicing today, you're not a pioneer. There's others that have been there and done it before, and their experience can be used to understand what the costs are likely to be and where the savings really are going to be. I know that we all like to think that we work in an environment that is unique, and of course we do work in unique environments. So we'll never find an exact match for our set of circumstances, but we're not so unique that we can't gain really good insights from benchmark data. So the second tip I would recommend is to use benchmark data to estimate costs and savings to build the business case, rather than trying to estimate them yourself from first principles.
Okay, Pete. So just to recap then, your first tip would be build the business case in terms of money, keep it in money terms all the time. And your second tip is benchmarking is key, absolutely key, and don't reinvent the wheel on this because others have done it. Okay.
Absolutely.
I know you've got a lot of other tips. Sorry, carry on, Pete.
Yeah, just to reiterate the use of benchmarks. The experience is there and it's proved. The great thing about the benchmark is that it's evidence of what has actually been delivered, rather than a theoretical business case that's based on a hope or a wish or an extrapolation. Okay.
Now, we haven't got time to go into more tips because I've got a few more questions for you. But Pete will be, sharing quite a number of tips for building your e-invoicing business case at the Invoicing Europe conference next week. The next question I wanted to ask, Pete, is how realistic is it to aim for 100% electronic invoice conversion? I mean, is it realistic?
Yeah, this is a good question, and it's one that a lot of people give consideration to. I think the first thing I would say is that it can be very dependent on industry. So in retail, for example, for direct goods, there are relatively few suppliers, and in that industry, EDI is fairly commonplace. So in that industry, very high percentages can be achieved, and in fact are achieved fairly easily. But generally, is it possible to get to 100% electronic? I think the answer to that question is either yes or no, depending on how you understand what electronic actually means. So for some purists, they would see electronic invoices as being strictly defined, structured messages sent from one computer to another, containing all of the invoice data, which is the classic OB10, Ariba, password type model. And to get to 100% pure electronic invoicing using that approach can be a major challenge if, for example, you have many suppliers operating in many countries, for example, especially if those are many suppliers sending very few invoices. If, however, you interpret the definition of an electronic invoice a bit more flexibly and include PDF invoices, where the invoice data can be extracted in order to process those in an automated fashion, then 100% electronic invoicing is a more realistic aspiration. I think it's really important to understand that there's no one-size-fits-all solution for suppliers, and I think it's critical to be flexible and to embrace a variety of approaches to maximise e-invoicing adoption.
Okay. Now, Pete, companies that may have decided not to adopt e-invoicing last year, why should they adopt it as a strategy this year? What's different in 2011 to prompt them to adopt it?
Yeah, well, we're in a difficult economic climate, and I think any opportunity to make significant savings is going to be considered very seriously. So there's certainly a much greater appetite to look at initiatives like e-invoicing today than perhaps in previous years. But there are two particularly important factors that I think makes 2011 a good year for e-invoicing. One is, the early adopters have now proven the business case. As I've said before, we're no longer pioneering e-invoicing. But secondly, governments have caught on, and in Europe in particular, invoice legislation, the laws relating to how invoices can be passed from business to business have been simplified. So it's now much easier to use e-invoicing, especially in Europe. And we're beginning to see the use of e-invoicing becoming the norm in some countries rather than the exception.
Okay, Pete. I just wanted you to quickly tell me what your top 3 plans are for the next 12 months, and for each of them, what is driving those initiatives?
Yeah, I think we have. At Orange Business Services, we've identified a number of priorities that we want to concentrate on to make our electronic invoicing plans successful. And but perhaps not the priorities that you would expect. So the first one, for example, is probably the least obvious, and that's our supplier master data. This is the information we hold about our suppliers, simple information like names, addresses, email, contact details, all of that basic information we store. This needs to be spotless. And for lots of organizations, and we are no exception, data can really be the Achilles heel of any kind of automation program. Accuracy of data is going to be absolutely critical, and this is one of our top priorities for the coming year. I think the second priority is quite simple. It's to eliminate paper. It's just to eliminate paper. Every page of an invoice contributes about 100 grams to our carbon footprint, and we're determined to ensure that as far as we can influence it, we minimise our carbon footprint as far as invoicing is concerned. And the third priority is really just to maximise as quickly as we can the number of invoices that we process automatically. Automation of the process is what we're trying to get to here. First of all, by scanning paper invoices and using intelligent data capture, and then by ramping up our use of pure electronic invoicing.
Okay, Pete. Well, I'm afraid we've run out of time for today's show. So thank you very much indeed, Pete, for sharing your insight and taking part in our program.
You're very welcome.
And thank you, Pete. Thank you. And if you would like to find out more about how to build a compelling business case, even more tips for your e-invoicing program, Pete will be presenting, as I mentioned, at our third e-invoicing Europe conference, which is actually taking place next week in London from the 5th to the 7th of July. If you want to register, there are still a couple of places left. So visit our website, www.sharedserviceslink.com, and find out more. And on the main site, there's obviously more articles, news, interviews, and reports on this subject as well. And if there's any other subjects you would like discussed in a future interview, get in touch and let us know. Otherwise, join us at the same time in 2 weeks when we'll be picking the brains of another shared services thought leader. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.